Posted by you/99wattsinth lawyers of Reddit. Have you ever done a case you secretly hoped you would lose and why? Defended a company that attracted a bunch of its employees with a profit-sharing incentive scheme. After 5 years, when the incentives were due to be paid, they tried to change the definition of profit in the employee contracts so they could argue that no incentives were payable. I was neither surprised nor unhappy when the judge told our clients they were full of shit. A manufacturing/fab shop I worked for did a similar thing, albeit on a much smaller scale. They implemented a bonus, and a few months into it, when we blew the goal out of the water, they told us that the way they were calculating the bonuses was flawed, so they had to change it. We ended up getting a fraction of what we should have, and it was in the form of a tool allowance that the company would manage and let us use to purchase our own tools. Probably so they could claim those purchases on their taxes. There was never any contract, so there wasn't much we could do. I'm so glad I left that shithole. My friend used to be a plaintiff's personal injury attorney, and he told me this story today about how he lost his client some money. The client was trying to use his kid to get money from a car accident. Didn't just take the kid to the ER, he took the kid to a chiropractor, tried to act like the kid was real hurt. Pro tip: kids don't get the kinds of soft tissue injuries that adults and especially the elderly can get. So my friend does some extra negotiating, and gets most of the settlement money paid to the kid. His client doesn't realize until after the papers were signed that most of his money was going to sit in the court's registry and go to his kid when he turns 18. He got angry, and my friend was like, "I thought that's what you wanted. I got a lot of money for your kid's injuries." I worked at a civil firm, and our biggest client for a while was a real estate investor who was the most unpleasant asshole I've ever met. His favorite scheme was buying distressed properties, translation, unlivable shitholes, at foreclosure sales, selling them on credit to people who couldn't afford to purchase a house any other way, waiting for the buyer to fix the place up with their own money, and then finding an excuse to foreclose on them so he could buy the place back and sell it for more to somebody else. As you can imagine, this is wildly illegal and got him sued by many, many people. Trying to defend this indefensible asshole against the people he screwed was a nightmare, but I desperately needed the job. We dropped him as a client when he stopped paying his bills, and I hope he winds up behind bars or bankrupt. Edit: finding an excuse absolutely encompasses fabricating an excuse. Family lawyer here, associate, so I don't get to pick my clients yet. I had one where both parents sucked, heroin addicts. I had mom, but didn't want either parent to end up with custody. DFCS had been called but had deemed it not severe enough to warrant removing the child. So I ended up calling another lawyer and strategizing with her to represent the grandparents so they could intervene for custody. It worked. Child is with grandma and doing much better. Parents are still addicts, crying face. I'm a law student, but the place I worked at last summer was a civil litigation firm with one partner who did mostly criminal defense. None of the associate attorneys liked getting assignments from that partner, since none of them had really signed on to do criminal defense work. Anyways, one associate ended up having to write an appeal for a guy who was convicted of raping and murdering his young child. There was a serious constitutional violation that the appeal was based on, but realistically the entire office was hoping the appeal would be denied, including the associate who got stuck writing it. Edit: don't know what happened, not gonna say where it was. The associate tried his best, no one got disbarred. Yes, it sucked to work on it knowing the guy was guilty. Social Security disability attorney here. I've had this feeling more than once. Representing a guy who was a registered sex offender. He was in his 50s when convicted, victim was under 14. He was denied disability. He was always nice and courteous, but I just despised every second in his presence. Clients who lie to me, or the judge, particularly about drug use. I've got your medical records. I can see all your blood tests and urine tests. I can see what you've admitted to your doctor. If you're not going to tell the truth, to your own lawyer, how am I supposed to help you? P.S. 99% of the people I represent probably deserve disability. We are all one medical problem away from never working again, never enjoying life again. Be kind to one another and don't take your health for granted. Edit to add: if you have the chance to add long-term disability coverage through an employer, or through an outside company, do it. Social Security is fucking ridiculous sometimes. I have had plenty of deserving clients wait 3+ years for a hearing just to get fucked over by having a hearing with a judge that has a 10% approval rate. A serial killer murdered a locally famous man in 2017. This victim owned a restaurant and was very popular in the city. He was a good human being. About 6 months after his murder, a lady comes in claiming his house was hers. Backtrack about 20 years, the client and the victim bought a piece of property together. They are both on the title. They split up and she leaves a property that is literally falling apart. The property was close to being condemned. The victim hasn't had contact with my client in 15 years. He did all the work on the house and paid off the mortgage. The victim's kids are suing my client for half the house. If there is a God, they would get all of it. In short, a house she had nothing to do with, that is worth $600K might be hers because a serial killer murdered the owner. She is a horrible person. I want to quit the firm over this case. I prosecuted 2 cases against a defendant for meth possession. They were slam dunks. Guy got arrested by the same officer at the same location and made the same admission. It was literally the same trial. He had several priors and faced a minimum of 2 consecutive prison sentences of 10 years each. He faced 20 years. I hoped he would be acquitted because, A, that is a fucking insane amount of prison time for a small amount of meth, B, he was a vet who was injured in combat, and, C, he was relatively young and had to use a colostomy bag. My asshole boss wouldn't allow me to deviate from the office policy plea offer. Defendant goes to trial and is quickly found guilty. He should have testified. I wouldn't have objected to anything. The kicker was that when the first verdict was read, he let out a long, loud fart. It was the saddest fart I've ever heard. He ended up getting 10 years total. The judge ran them concurrently. After that, I got chewed out by my office for not arguing with the judge that he had to run them consecutively. I used to do plaintiff's work in credit card debt collection cases. Yes, I was that asshole. One time we were suing a guy for $3,000. He had some type of cancer of the throat and had one of his jaw bones removed. He was in really bad shape. Prior to the hearing, the guy told me he quit paying when his wife left as she couldn't deal with his cancer. Also, his church had collected all they could to help him, $1,000 in cash. Also, he said he was judgment-proof, which means he's so poor that there was no way my client would ever see any money from him, extremely common. I called back to the office with his proposed $1,000 to satisfy the debt in full and my boss said, "I don't give a fuck about his jawbone. Tell him $2,000 or no deal." The trial was brutal. He broke down crying when I got him to admit he intentionally didn't pay his credit card bills due to his medical bills. He was clearly broken. I pitied the guy so much but still did my job and won. We got the full $3,000 in our judgment. BTW, our client was a third-party debt buyer, meaning they bought the debt for $0.02/$1.00 of debt. This means that our client was rewarded $3,000 plus court costs plus attorney's fees for something they paid $60 for and will never be able to collect on. P.S. Missing jawbone aside, this pathetic scenario was/is not at all uncommon. 2 times when I was not quite a lawyer but doing work experience/student. Pedophile in court after police found indecent images of children on his computer. Wanted him to go straight to prison just off of that. I worked in my university's pro bono clinic. We received a request from a convicted pedophile who was already serving a prison sentence to review his case file to see if he could appeal the length of the sentence on the grounds that he had been sentenced under the wrong sentencing guidelines. Conducted an interview in prison with him and my supervisor. Was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. We thankfully couldn't assist. He was polite, and to my naive surprise at the age of 20, likable. Took a long time for me to reconcile those feelings against what I knew he had done. Counterbalance, work experience at a criminal firm. Defendant was a British veteran who had served in Northern Ireland, became a drug addict and spiraled into a cycle of criminal behaviors, clearly was suffering from PTSD and other mental health issues. Was in court for battery and actual bodily harm and was pleading guilty. I, for reasons surpassing understanding, ended up in the interview suite alone with him. I'll never forget how he broke down and described to me how he knew his life was out of control but couldn't seem to stop or break the cycle, how he so desperately wished he hadn't ended up back here and how he'd essentially watched his whole life destroyed. He was crying. I had no idea what to say or do, but I desperately hoped he got the help he needed. Those experiences combined were enough to put me off ever practicing criminal law. The brother of a good friend of mine is a nationalist. Skinhead, thinks immigrants and not poverty is his main problem and likes weapons and stuff. He isn't an activist, participating in violent acts etc., yet he is a total ass. My friend calls me one day. His brother was arrested for illegal possession of weapons. He was stopped while driving for a typical alcohol test and the police found a police baton in his trunk. He had bought it through dark web and he was stupid enough to carry it in his trunk. My friend begged me to help. I did, and I did it only for my friend, which I love very much. The guy 99% never used it or any other weapon as well. He is just a stupid bully who likes to appear dangerous. When we met he was so scared and it was really funny watching this pile of muscles shake like a girl in fear of going to jail. For a guy like this, I would never use any fake story or narrative to defend him. We just tried to prove that he didn't intend to use it, that he never was violent and it was just plain stupidity. I was hoping that he was sentenced. It is a misdemeanor, so he would get no jail time. But I'd hope for a nice fine or some tens of hours of social services at least. But the judge, for F's sake, liked the honesty. He sentenced him with parole, which means if he doesn't commit any crime in the next 2 years, he won't go to jail and his criminal record will stay clean. In the end, he was happy not to go to jail. But I scared the shit out of him, explaining in depth what would happen if he was caught for any illegal action from now on. And I think he will behave from now on.